Okay, so this presentation is being recorded. Hi, my name's Martin Hinshelwood. I'm the owner at Naked Agility with Martin Hinshelwood. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I've been delivering software for 20 years and working with organizational change for over 10 years. I'd like to thank Guillaume for this opportunity to talk about story points and velocity. This session is an experimental topic for me. I'm hoping that you that are attending can help me tell a better story in the future. So I'll be looking for feedback at the end. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Jessica will hopefully be able to moderate that. Jessica is a fluent Spanish speaker, so if there are any confusions about what I'm saying, feel free to message her in the chat. You can also, in the Teams UI, you can actually turn on live captions. It will only do it currently in English, but you can do it, and maybe that's helpful. So you just click the ellipse on the center of the screen and turn on live captions. So I've got it turned on that machine up there for us. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to provide a link to the presentation, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, and I have lots of other presentations that I've recorded and published on nakedagility.tv. So I see we've got a few more people, so let's see how we do for some participation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link in the chat so that everybody can find it. Let me put the link in the chat so you don't have to type it. So I have posted this link in the chat. It is case sensitive, so if you're typing it into a browser, please do so carefully. And I'm just waiting to see who is able to make it on. There we go. I've got a couple of people. I have visiting penguin, visiting crab, and visiting pig. Awesome. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to put a timer for 2 minutes, but if you see there's an outline on the top right of the mural, and you should be able to click measuring progress, and that will take you to, oh, thank you, visiting penguin is following me. I will summon everybody to this, summon everybody, there we go. So what I'd like to do first is a little exercise where I'd like you to tell me what techniques you have used to measure progress within a sprint, and maybe other techniques that you've heard of as well. And I'd like you to create a sticky for each method. So I'm just going to put a timer on for 2 minutes so we don't spend too long doing things. But I'd like you to create as many stickies as you can within that measuring progress box. So I'm going to give you that 2 minute timer, which is now 1 minute 45. I'll maybe start it off. Oh, that's a good point. If you don't know how to create a sticky using this tool, you double click anywhere on the screen and it will just create one. Absolutely, there we go. So there's visiting pig is creating one, and visiting bird, which is Jessica, is having a go as well. So you just double click anywhere and type in, yep, burn down is definitely a tool that I've seen teams use. Any other tools? So for the sake of the recording, I'm going to bring this over to the share. There's about a minute left. Burn down chart, burn up. What about metrics? What about points of data? What sort of other ways are there to measure? Is it just burn down? What do you plot on a burn down? Number of defects, I like that one. That's one I've seen before. Let's see. Work until meeting the sprint goal. User stories closed by day. Cool. Nobody has mentioned story points. Remaining story points, that's a good one. So the story points must be a metric inside of that. Okay. Work in process. Thank you very much, whoever that was. So we have a number of things that folks have entered. Burn down chart, work until meeting the sprint goal. So I'm not sure how you're measuring that or what data points you're using with that. I guess you would maybe look at story points remaining, maybe, or stories remaining or items remaining. We've got burn up, work in process, user stories closed by day, a number of defects created. That can definitely be a good measure, but is generally a measure of quality rather than progress. But they are all good measures. So the ones that I was surprised were not on there are story points and velocity are the two most common ways. It was implied in at least one of the post-its, so that does make sense. So the most popular method for doing that is story points and velocity. And really, story points and velocity are not actually part of Scrum. There are a number of things that we collectively believe are required to do Scrum, and these have been perpetuated by long running perseverance of trainers to the training, teaching to the lowest common denominator and trying to keep things as simple as possible. Story points and velocity are easy to understand, they're easy to implement, they're easy to follow. I would like to assert that they don't provide as much value as folks think they do. There's a kind of a general consensus in the trainer community that folks that attend Scrum training are not smart enough to do anything else. And I would like to disagree. I think they are smart enough to do something else. And whenever I teach Scrum training, I always use different measures that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I'm sure some of you have already guessed what I'm talking about. But if you go and have a look in the Scrum guide, you can see I've collected a couple of screenshots for both velocity and story points, neither of which are mentioned in the Scrum guide. But neither is burn down, neither is user story, neither is original estimate, bug count, or actual versus completed hours. None of these things are mentioned in the Scrum guide. I would say it's okay for a team to start with story points and velocity. I've seen many teams get value out of that. There are many things that change when a team moves from traditional project management practices of the past to more empirical practices of the present. And sometimes we kind of need to pick our battles. One such battle is that of story points and velocity and all of the other gubbins that goes around with it. That's maybe a very British expression. Gubbins is just all the other stuff. Like if you're going to do story points and velocity, you probably have some kind of burn down. You maybe have some kind of burn up. Those kind of artifacts are part of that. Perhaps we do this because we need to appease other parts of the organization that are not yet ready for change. Perhaps we have to distance ourselves from data because we have a traditional persecution of the team by using data of the past. That's that original estimate versus actuals that I see all the time in organizations. And we need to get better at estimating by closing that gap between original and actuals. And it's just not really tenable. While story points and velocity can be a good starting point, they are not a good long-term story. I'm not saying that there's no value in story points or planning poker. That's what this team here is doing, a little bit of planning poker. When a team is just starting out, they kind of do need to keep things a little bit simple and iterate towards better outcomes. We often start from typical traditional practices, and planning poker is definitely a good learning point. Story points use rough sizing as a way to analyze work and break it down. Because really, the scores, the numbers that we get, the points that we come up with for stories, they're just made up, like we always used to. They're a relative rough sizing thing that allows us and enables our team to get a shared understanding of the work. It's about generating conversations of understanding what we don't know that other team members do know, and being able to come to a shared understanding, shared learning of what those things are. And that's awesome. That's exactly what we want to achieve. But I would assert that we don't need to use those numbers after that exercise. That is definitely a good exercise to have, but the story points and velocity are not super useful. Because agile teams try to use story points and velocity for future predictability, to gain that level of predictability, and it's a total fallacy that is a valid thing. While it would be okay for a team to use it for a while, if an agile team is still using velocity and story points after they have 20 or 30 sprints under their belt, then I would have serious concerns about their ability to adapt to change, and their sincerity towards that change. In general, teams using story points just don't understand their work or its nature. This is what I mean by immaturity, and not that's something that's a sign of maturity, the opposite of that. That's what I mean by it being an immature thing. We just don't understand our work enough to have a concrete measure. Indeed, the Scrum team using story points really has no constant, consistent reference points, and they're just shooting in the dark, same as they were before. This is very common, and I believe it to be an organizational dysfunction. We pick story points because of that organizational immaturity. And while they have, in doing planning poker and understanding those things, gained additional understanding of the goals of what those things are that we're trying to achieve, what it is we're going to do, they still don't have an understanding of the predictability, and thus they have no confidence in their predictions. They may have false confidence, but it's not actual confidence in their predictions. We need some concrete data that we can use to build trust with our stakeholders, that we know what we're talking about at all. Otherwise, they may just take their money elsewhere, and then we don't have additional work. We need that level of confidence. So the traditional method for improving that level of confidence is to focus on that velocity fluctuation and try and improve that velocity fluctuation. Improve the team's position and have a more stable velocity. So what I would like to do is, there is a second question here in the fluctuating velocity section. So if you click fluctuating velocity on the right, I will summon everybody. I'm only going to put 2 minutes. I know it says 3, but I'm going to put 2 minutes on there. I'm going to ask that you create a post-it for everything that you could do with a team to help them improve their velocity, stabilize it, maybe make it bigger, plus make it more consistent. So I know there's a few people following me, but I'm just going to zoom in so I can read that a little bit better because it was rather small. So work on commitment and optimistical view, refinement. Now, technical debt, reduce waste. Yep. Couldn't we restrict the team's holidays? That's usually a good way to have more consistency. I'm just joking with that one. There's about 40 seconds left. Hit them. I don't know who was typing that, but that was visiting Sea Lion. Let's wallop the team, make them work harder. Focus on one thing instead of many. That's kind of getting to the crux of it. Focus on the sprint goal. Fixing technical debt. That's definitely something we're going to do. Collaborative refinement, a very powerful technique. These are all really good techniques. I would be concerned with focusing too much on reducing waste. Waste is the elimination of waste is a lean technique that applies mostly to understood work because we want to remove all waste from the process. Like if we were building a set of cars, we've got a production line and we want to eliminate all waste. Waste in a creative endeavor or things that look like waste in a creative endeavor are actually the thing that gives us that little bit of friction, that creativeness of the development team of building interesting and powerful products. So I like reducing waste. I just would be careful with that technique. I would reduce technical debt. That's a way to reduce waste, reducing rework. Build testing into the process rather than test after, which a lot of teams do. That will reduce waste as well. So there are definitely things we can do to reduce waste. But the reality is, if I can change that, there we go. Your velocity is going to fluctuate. That is just a fundamental reality of the way we work. Velocity was a way to kind of assert that confidence with a plot of our delivered story points, along with some clever calculations like maybe the mean or the mean of the worst three. And we assert that we're likely to deliver about 20 story points. This was such a wholly improbable assumption that the vast majority of Scrum teams talk about carryover points and quiz me on how to represent that. Do you re-estimate and stick it on the backlog, or do you just go straight into the next sprint? And do you chop it up? And do you get points for the stuff you've just done in the previous sprint, even though you didn't finish it? These are all questions that make visible, make transparent a fundamental problem with the idea of story points and velocity in the first place. Scrum teams have been basing their confidence level that they talk to stakeholders about based on just an agreed consensus that can't be compared between teams, can't be looked at across an organization, and it's susceptible to any sort of gaming you would like, and it's just made up in the team's estimation room. So if you have a different person doing the work than was involved in estimating, maybe because there was some vacation time and somebody who was critical to creating the understanding that we got during refinement is now they're off, while when we go to take this story, they're not available, then it's going to take much longer than we thought it was. Maybe some critical skill is missing. Maybe some critical insight is missing. We've shared our understanding as much as possible, but we just don't have the confidence level that we thought we did. So we end up with carryovers. We end up with things spilling over into the next sprint in a way that is untenable. I got this quote off Daniel Vacanti's Twitter. He actually gave me another quote that I'm not going to use because it's very rude. But he says he used to say that story points set the agile industry back 10 years. And he was wrong. They set the industry back 20 years. We have been, Scrum has been around for 25 years. The Agile Manifesto was signed nearly 20 years ago. And we're still talking about story points and velocity as a concrete measure for teams. And it is just not acceptable anymore. We need to create a world in which we have a more suitable set of measures that we can actually use to understand our work, understand how the team is doing, and understand how changes that that team makes or that the organization makes impacts on that work. We need something that when you game the system, it produces a different result. Instead of gaming the system by, oh, we'll just call that a 10-pointer instead of a 5-pointer, and we've doubled the amount of work that we did. We want people to be gaming the system in a way that benefits the process, that reduces the time it takes for us to deliver things. And there are some very key practices around that. They are well known. I'm not going to be, I'm not opening a magic box, but we need to be actively managing items in progress, actively managing the items that we're working on. The way to do that is definitely to visualize your work, understand what stage things are at, and if you will have seen a Kanban style board before, where work itself moves across rather than a storyboard where the work is stationary and items of work flow across. So the what is stationary on this board, the what is flowing across during the sprint. And we maybe have some stages along the way that work has to flow through in order to get to the end, get to production. But you can see I'm limiting work in process by having a total WIP limit that's divided into the individual columns. Kanban has no requirement to have individual columns with WIP limits. However, if you are going to have columns within that process, then they should have WIP limits, but you don't have to. But we need to also record our cycle time. We need to understand how long things are in process for. How long does it take from when the team that owns that Kanban, owns that part of the process, when they decide that work has started until they decide that work has finished. We can use our work in process and plot that on a graph called a cumulative flow graph. Cumulative flow is very scary to look at when you first see it, but it actually gives you an indication of the predictability that you're having. So you can see this particular cumulative flow that you see there, which is a little bit small, but can I zoom in? Oh, I think I can using, there we go. This particular cumulative flow is showing each of the different columns that we had in that graph. And sorry, was there a question? There's just some background noise. It's okay. Everybody's muted now. That's awesome. So these lines on the cumulative flow are wavy, i.e. not straight, is an indication of a lack of predictability. The more predictability you have in the system, the straighter those lines are. And then it's easy to see, once those lines are a little bit straighter, if they're diverging, your work in process is increasing. If they're coming together, then your work in process is reducing. Ideally, what you want to see is parallel lines, but that's almost never going to happen in the real world. But that's the goal that you're aiming for. As you do certain things in your process, you can see the impact that they have on your predictability. This graph is indicative of the predictability of the team, and that these lines are waving around all over the place is an indication that they're not being very predictable. Let's unzoom that. There we go. So cycle time and work in process are two really powerful measures. Throughput is a measure of items of work per unit of time. So you can use any unit of time you like. If you're sprinting, it's probably a 2-week sprint. So how many pieces of work were you able to deliver in 2 weeks? And it does not care about size. It very deliberately doesn't care about size, which is the difference between throughput and velocity. Velocity usually cares about the size or complexity of items because you're applying story points. Throughput ignores that, because then gaming the system will be the team reducing the size of the items by breaking them down or making them simpler. And things that are smaller are going to go through this process a lot quicker because smaller things are easier to do. So if we half the size of all of the things that we're working on, we're going to half the amount of work that we have to do. Therefore, we will half the amount of time it takes to go through the system. Therefore, each item will get delivered more quickly. So I'm fine with a team gaming that metric, but throughput allows us to tell an interesting story. But there's one more metric that we really need to understand that helps us have more interesting conversations during our existing Agile events. Maybe you're doing Scrum, maybe you're doing other processes, maybe you've made up your own very powerful empirical process control system that works for you. And that is work item aging. We have to understand how old things are and how close they are to our likelihood of completing them in order to see whether we need to go deal with something now. Is this getting so old, it's been in there so long that it's likely not to be delivered by the end of the sprint? That may be something that we want to focus on as a team, that we maybe want to swarm around. So it allows us to have some of those more interesting conversations. So in order to use flow in a Scrum context, I'm a professional Scrum trainer. My recommendation is to use Scrum as your scaffolding for project management, and then flow techniques to manage your work. That would be my general recommendation. But flow in a Scrum process, those core practices are that defining and visualizing your work, limiting the work in process, we have to measure it, and then actively managing those items. And the actively managing is super important there. You're not actively managing if you're just ignoring stuff and letting it flow through the sprint. You need to actually go decide whether you need to do something extra, whether you need to change what you're doing inside of that process. And inspecting and adapting your workflow, you need to constantly make changes to your workflow, see how it affects the data. One of the things that I mentioned, which is the most common thing that we talk about in any flow techniques, is reducing batch size. Making batches smaller will help us deliver things more quickly. So I would like to do another little exercise in Mural. So I have, where did I put it? In the Mural, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. It's a tab that's already there. There it is. In the Mural, there's a third exercise in number 3, batches in Scrum. And 3 people are following me. Let me just summon everyone, and then I'll not zoom. So I've got 9 people following me now. What I'd like you to do is create a sticky for everything that you think is a batch in Scrum. What are batches in this Scrum world? So I'm gonna put 2 minutes on the time box. You're a smart group. You should be able to do this in 2 minutes. And we need to come up with a list of those batches. So think of things that you would be counted batches. Deliverable, definitely a thing that is a batch. What would you call that in the Scrum world? We can have that as an additional sticky next to it. Oh, the increment. Okay, yes, definitely. The increment is a batch. Thank you for making that clearer. I was not 100% on that. For those, there are 9 people here. There are, how many participants are there in the... There are 12 participants in the call. In the chat, you should be able to see a link for the mural. I'm going to post it again. I see Marty has also posted it again, because folks that are new in will not see it, but I will post it again so folks can get in. Thank you, Marty, for that. That's very useful. So we get PBIs in the sprint backlog. So are you saying that the sprint backlog is a batch, or that the PBIs are a batch, or both? Maybe you need 2 stickies. I would count them as 2 separate things. Does anybody else would like to add a few things to this list? Sprint backlog, yes, thank you very much. Visiting dragon, bracket visiting sea lion. Awesome. Is there any anybody else going to add something? There's 25 seconds left. Retrospective commitments. Perfect. Thank you, Visiting Sea Lion. I'm going to add a couple as well. I'm going to say PBIs, product backlog items, whether you call them stories or requirements, whatever you call those things. So we've got the sprint backlog, PBIs, the increment, retro next actions. These are all batches in Scrum. And one of the things that we try and do once we start looking at our flow techniques is we start reducing the batch size for as many things as possible. So we want to reduce the size of our PBIs, the things from our product backlog that we're taking through. On average, I see Scrum teams taking on maybe 8 to 12 things per sprint. It's just a vague average from my experience. But teams that monitor flow have that go up to 70 or 80 things, because they're making each of those pieces of value much smaller, which means they flow much more quickly through the system. And once you have a flow-based system, you can start looking at how you can break down that batch of the increment. Are you doing continuous delivery? Are you using DevOps practices to continuously deliver your product to production? And what engineering practices do you use to make sure that you always have a good product to be able to ship to production? So once you have that, you can then start flowing work across the sprint boundary, because we always have working software. We're always shipping. Every commit to source control in a continuous delivery world ends up in production. Therefore, we have the engineering practices in place to hide things that are not finished yet. Maybe we're using feature flags and still ship to production. We can then have a piece of work that, well, we didn't quite finish it in this sprint, but we're going to finish it in the next sprint, and it just flows right across the sprint boundary. Then Scrum becomes that container for planning, and flow management techniques are used for delivery. And that's very powerful. We're using flow in our production line, but we're using a 2-week iterative cycle for our cognitive ideation and planning cycle. That's really powerful. So then at the individual events in Scrum, we can actually have completely different conversations. When we're at our daily Scrum, we're not necessarily focused on the individual anymore. What did I do what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? What am I going to do tomorrow? Yeah, anything that's blocking me. We're looking at things on the board and saying, why is this thing not moving? Why is it here so long? oh, this one's not been here that long, but this one's been here really long. So let's focus on this one instead. What can we do to move this item forward to get it closer to the end of that process? And things like going right to left on the board help with that, because you've got a pull process. You're not pushing work through this process. It's being pulled from the right, from the left to the right. Yeah, pulled. I don't think I've got my terminology quite right there, but I think you know what I mean. And it allows us to really have better conversations about that work. And the thing that allows us to see when things have been sitting too long, measuring latency. One easy way to do it, it says there, write the date on the back of the cards. I've seen dot voting. So you just put every day, put a dot on the card, and the cards with the most dots that are still in progress are the things you want to focus on. Jessica really liked that idea of sticking a banana peel to the item, and the browner the banana peel, the longer it's been sitting there. You don't want it sitting there too long, or it'll start to smell. But one of the things that we often use in the graph that we use there is a histogram with WIP limits, and the green is you can see the 50, 70, 85, 95. I'm going to talk about confidence levels in the next slide, but that's effectively green is things are flowing awesome. Half of the things that we do end up in that green bit. 70% of the things we do end up in the light green, 85% end up in the yellow, and 95% of things are done within the orange. So if something's in the red, it is likely that it will not be finished by the end of the sprint. If something's in the orange, it's definitely a concern. If something's in the yellow, it's going to be a concern. So you can see that progression. And in this particular graph, they're calculating it per column. You can do it just overall, which is what I'm going to show you next. So we use the cycle time scatter plot. So we plot all of those cycle times that we calculate, how long things are going to take on the vertical axis here. So that is number of days. So you can see 7 days, 10 days, 12 days, 16 days, all the way up to 30 days to deliver something. And then along the bottom is the date that it was finished. And you can see that some of the items have maybe you need to zoom in for that, but have a 4 in them. How many items were in that 4? Oh, sorry, 4 items were in that particular point in time. The horizontal dotted lines with the 50, 75, 85, and 95 are calculated that 50% of all the items displayed on this graph are below that 50% line. 75% of all the items are below the 70% line. 85% same as you go up. And the prediction on the left is the 7 days. 50% of all the things that we do based on this data will be delivered in 7 days. But if you go all the way up to 85%, it's 16 days. So we can say for sure for this particular team that 85% of the time, anything we bring into their sprint is finished in 16 days or less. Anything. That's a really powerful measure. That's a concrete statistical measure. There is some leeway there. There is some space for concern, but 85% is pretty sure. Remember, we're working on creative work. So more is unknown than known. So if we get a 16-day 85%, then that's pretty good. But I would ask a question. I would ask, if we're on a 2-week sprint, is 16 days okay? And in fact, it's not. It's too slow. So we can use those flow metrics in different events within our Scrum in order to understand them a little bit better. So we can use work item aging in our daily scrum to understand where we need to focus our time. We can use cycle time in our retrospective to understand how things went during the sprint. Are we able to increase our confidence level that we're giving to our stakeholders? What does that confidence level look like? What can we do to improve it? We can look at that data there, the cycle time. We can use our work in process during the daily scrum to understand how things are flowing. Again, part of that aging data as well. But also during our retro, do our WIP limits make sense? Is work flowing well through the system? Do we need to do something about it? And potentially at the review as well, talking to our stakeholders, get more credibility with your stakeholders. And you can also use throughput during sprint planning. Our throughput is a concrete indication of what's happened in the past. So we're able to use that to understand what we might potentially be able to do in the future. It's a lot more, it has a much higher degree of accuracy than velocity, because we will have been able over a period of time to improve our predictability, which is not possible using velocity and story points. So we would use throughput during our planning, our review, and our retro. So this data will help us understand those things, help us manage that work, help us have build trust with our stakeholders by making that story of data and when things will be done a lot more credible. As a good quote, you can definitely have a read of that later. It's long, but it's basically half your batch size, things will get delivered faster. Half it again, things will get delivered faster again. If you want to research some stuff on this topic, I've put some notes up there. Little's Law, queuing theory, continuous delivery, no estimates. And there is a guide from scrum.org that is an addendum to the Scrum Guide called the Kanban Guide for Scrum Teams, about how you implement flow techniques within the empirical control system, which is Scrum. And that can be very powerful. So in the minute I have left, I would like to open up for both questions and feedback. If you want, you can unmute to ask questions. I would also love for you to put feedback in the mural, things in this talk you were happy with, things you thought were meh, and things that you didn't like, as well as anything that you think I can do to improve the talk. Also, questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, hi Martin. Here the dragon speaking, the dragon guest. What do you think about putting some metrics related more than you're talking about incomes, about throughput, but what do you recommend to a team that want to begin to focus on outcome or on output more than only predictability, about if what they are really what they are producing, what is the real impact to the customer? Or so,
yeah, and that's an awesome question. So just to paraphrase that so that I make sure I've got it right, these metrics are awesome for monitoring delivery and improving delivery, but that doesn't. We could still be delivering a pile of crap to our customers. How do we monitor value that we're delivering to our customers? Is that your question?
Yeah. Is it? Yeah. No. Just stopping delivering crap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that
stop
they
delivering
are
crap, deliver more value. Yeah, that's your measure. No. So I talk about. I teach a class called the Professional Scrum with UX, user experience, and what it really is what data do we use to optimize value, and there's no concrete measures for that. I would actually point you a little bit at the EBM, evidence-based management guide from scrum.org. They have a bunch of starter measures that are very generic, that are good for measuring change within your organization. And are you improving, and are you having happy customers? Because happy customers, happy employees, always good. But also, for every single idea that your product owner has, they need to, along with the Scrum team, understand what they're trying to achieve with it. What behavior in your customers are you trying to change? What are you trying to improve? How are you going to measure that? So it's specific to each backlog item. It's part of that what that you're delivering. So how you're going to measure that and then actually measure it. So telemetry is your friend there. Are people actually using the feature that you built? Are they using it in the way you expect? Is it creating that change in behavior for the users that you expect? So you have to be able to model the existing behavior and then see the change. I usually use App Insights, Application Insights for that. Works on any tech, any platform. And it allows you to not only collect the base data, like some of the Google Analytics stuff plus the server-side stuff, but also add your own custom metrics that are about how your application functions, how that particular feature works, and monitor that. Data is your friend. Honestly, data is your friend. Customers lie. Remember that. Customers lie. Data generally doesn't, although you can read it badly. So definitely good. Thank you for that question. Did I answer it?
Yeah, I was writing. Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Agree with the lies of our customers or users.
What was it? Henry Ford said if he'd listened to customers, he would have created faster horses rather than the motor car. Any other questions? So if there's not any other questions, I saw a couple of folks left. There's probably other talks to go to. Let me skip to the last slide where I have a lovely link, which I just noticed has O's and zeros without a good font. So that is AOOS 2020, i.e. 2020, AOS 2020 dash velocity. And that will get you this copy of the presentation. You'll be able to view it online, and the recording, I guess, will go up at some point. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Martin.
You're welcome. Please feel free, hook me up on LinkedIn.
I will.
Gracias, Martín. Me gustó mucho tu plática.
Gracias.
Thank you, Martin. A pleasure.
Oh, it's coffee break. That means I could have kept going.